You're Free to Go is sponsored by Milburn Men's Clothing, where top athletes shop for sharp, tailored style. And whether Mark and I are in the studio or the courtroom, Milburn dresses us for success. Mention YFTG and get 10% off at Milburn Men's Clothing, which has been providing the finest in men's clothing and suits since 1946. Call 651-645-2922 or visit www.milburn.com. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to our show, You're Free to Go. We're glad to have you with us again today. You may notice something missing from our studio. You know, typically Mark and I are here together. So it's just me today. As you know, we have cases all over the country, and Mark actually lives in LA as well. So I just got back from working on the P. Diddy case in New York. I'm back in our office in Boca Raton, Florida. And Mark is out in LA where he has a home, and we have the office out there as well. So Mark, can you hear us? This is our first time doing this remotely. We're excited about this.
That's right. I'm here in LA, to be exact, in Beverly Hills, where our other office is. And like you, I was away in Montana doing a little R&R. And now we're ready to go back and tell these people some fascinating things.
It looks like you have a little sunburn from skiing. Were you snow skiing?
Yeah. Snow skiing and then cycling in Yellowstone National Park amongst the bisons with a little bit of bear spray because you never know what you're going to encounter.
So who's faster, you or the bison?
No, they're much faster. You got to go very slow and don't talk to them.
Good. Well, you know, last time we promised our guests that this episode would be some of our crazy ass cases, and we love doing these episodes. So today we're going to start off talking about a really nice gentleman that we had. He was in his 70s. I think he was around 75 years old. And this is a case of someone who really was accused and arrested for something that you and I both agree he never, ever should have been arrested for and should not have been prosecuted. It was a case where in the end we got a great result, but unfortunately it was very frustrating for us and our client for a good 2+ years while we were defending him. I know.
So why don't you set the stage, Guy, and tell them how this kind of began?
Absolutely. If everyone remembers at the end of last episode, I said this is a case of a gentleman who's home sleeping and a woman breaks into his house and yet he gets arrested. And that's exactly what happened. So our client is a really successful man. He has a very, very large company, and he had a marriage to a woman that was very short. It was about a 3-year marriage, and they got divorced. His ex-wife received several $1 million in the divorce from this very short marriage, and she had a lot of benefits as well, like health insurance that continued after the divorce. Rumor from the community, actually it was more than rumor, we heard from a lot of witnesses, was that she was running around telling her friends and even family members that she did not get enough money in her divorce. She was not happy about it, and she was going to set her ex-husband up, our client, and get more money out of him. And that's exactly what she did. Our client got wind of it, and he basically told her, do not come to my house. You're not welcome here.
Well, actually, Guy, she did come for a little while.
Yeah.
And he realized this was not working out. And, she was up to something. So he specifically barred her from coming back, right?
That's correct. Yeah, he did. He asked her to leave. She had only a couple effects in the house. Really, it was, I think, if I remember correctly, because it was a few years ago, maybe they had a dog that they had shared, and that
they
was
jointly shared.
Right,
yeah.
Jointly shared this dog that was at the house, and he had his ex-wife leave, and basically she was running around town and running up credit card bills at all these stores, buying clothes and jewelry to his account, his credit cards, even though they were divorced. She was also, again, talking about setting him up. So when he heard about that, he called her daughter, his ex-wife's daughter, his ex-daughter-in-law, I guess, or stepdaughter, told her, tell your mom, do not come over. He just knew she was coming. He told her, don't come over. One evening, he was so nervous that she might stop by that he literally barricaded his front door shut.
Locked the door,
Yep.
Barricaded it, and put a chair against it.
Correct.
Right?
Which this man, I wouldn't know how to barricade a door. It looked pretty good to me because
obviously wasn't.
Right, as the listeners will hear, it's all on camera. So our client goes to sleep. He's laying on the couch watching a television show, and he's fast asleep. And there's a bang, bang, bang on the door. Next thing he knows, the door is being pushed open. It's being jammed, pushed. Well, what happened to help this ex-wife with her setup so she could shake him down for more money in the divorce? Um, she had a friend with her, and they were videotaping the entire thing from before they even.
Fact, the videotape started before they even broke in, right?
That's right. Before they even broke in, if that doesn't show they're trying to gather evidence against him, they start videoing. They bang on the door. He doesn't answer it. So what do? They push through the door, and we see on the video the chair that he had jammed the door with goes flying across the floor. So that corroborates his story that yes, I did try to, close that door with a chair so no one could get in. Of course, we saw the text messages that he sent to her and to his ex stepdaughter saying, "Don't come over." So all that evidence is there. She comes in, she's holding up the camera with her girlfriend. They're filming him, and he basically says, "Get the hell out, get the hell out." He lost his temper, as you recall, and he knocked the phone out of her hand. Right, Mark?
Right.
And that's really where, the cops really picked up on that issue. They said, well, that's a battery. He hit someone's hand holding their phone, and we can arrest him for battery, which is, of course, ridiculous since he was in his own home. It's not her home.
They broke in.
Yeah,
they're filming him without his consent.
That's right.
Right.
And he certainly didn't consent to it. He knocked the phone out of her hand. Now, they arrest him that night for battery. The guy's never been in trouble before. He's a real honorable member of society. And like I said, a big businessman, successful family man with several children. Now he's sitting in jail. And he gets out of jail when we bond him out. And the next day, his ex-wife goes to the police and says, "Oh, I forgot to tell you something. The night that you arrested him and I gave my report under oath and you interviewed me, I forgot to mention that he pulled a gun and pointed it at me and threatened to shoot me." How do you forget that? I don't know.
Well, there's one problem with that.
Yeah, tell the listeners.
It wasn't on the video.
Exactly. She forgot that they videoed the whole thing. So, but the problem before anyone looked at the video was they rearrested our client for aggravated assault, which is threatening.
Now.
Yeah, it's a serious felony of waving the gun at someone and threatening to shoot them with it. So he's now facing a serious felony. So again, I mentioned before, she's out running around town, even though they're divorced, running up literally six figures in credit card bills going to our client for clothes and jewelry. They're divorced. She shouldn't be doing that. We then find out, Mark, remember, we found out through our forensic computer expert that while our client was in jail, she stayed in his house and hacked his computer and downloaded all his financial data.
Right, to see what he had.
Yeah, she knew all his bank accounts, his
that
life.
wasn't evidence that she was trying to shake him down. I don't know what was.
That's for sure. So she hacked into his account. She set him up. She told people in the community she was setting him up. And then she even videotaped the whole thing. So what did we do? We met with the prosecutor. There was one senior prosecutor. She brought in a even more senior prosecutor. And the two of them refused. And it brings us to an interesting issue. They refused to drop the case. It brings us to the issue of that they believed their victims, the two ladies who pushed their way into the house, right? And I know, Mark, you have a lot of strong opinions and feelings about the relationship between a victim and the prosecutor's office.
It's a very interesting subject because as a practical matter, there are many, many, many cases where prosecutors do not take up their responsibility and prosecute cases where there are legitimate victims. And, we've heard numerous stories about that. And so, there is a very big concern that victims' rights are protected. Problem is sometimes, like everything else, pendulum swings too far in the other direction. We found so many cases where just the say so of somebody will get someone else arrested. A classic example is in a domestic dispute. Police are called to the house, and it goes both ways, either a husband or a wife. Either one accuses the other of having hit them, and next thing you know, a person's arrested. Because there is the tendency to be careful, but sometimes a little too careful, even reckless on the part of the police or prosecutors to believe a story without any corroboration. And then you have a person who undergoes an arrest. And I don't think anybody who hasn't been arrested doesn't really yet fully understand just what you go through when you're arrested. Sometimes you're arrested right before a weekend. Certainly in federal courts, when you're arrested on a Friday night, you sit in till Monday because you're not going to have a bond hearing till Monday. And
Right.
even then, you go in, you're booked, you're handcuffed, you're put in jail cells. Sometimes you put in depending on the locale, you're putting in a population that is not exactly ideal. It could even be dangerous. And, it's a very, very frustrating experience for the guilty and even for the not guilty, even more so.
Right.
So, I mean, this is what happened to our client. Never experienced it before. And it was a horrifying experience. And then to be charged a second time with a crime that just there was absolutely no evidentiary support for was outrageous.
In fact, the evidence was in opposition to what they said. I recall
Right.
we had an expert get the video that the victim filmed it herself. We got that video from the victim that gave it to the state, who gave it to us. They forensically examined that and they put it in slow motion, the video, and they then, enlarged it. And what you did see in that video was when he got up from the couch and he opened the door that they had busted open and he approached him at the door. He then goes back to his couch, and next to his couch, there was a table that had his gun on it. He actually took that gun and holstered it immediately,
Right.
and it never came out of his holster the entire time until the police got there. So the
Right.
evidence actually supported that they were lying when they said he pointed the gun in their face. He actually handled it in a very responsible way that, he was afraid, I'm not going to leave this gun out on the table where someone could grab it. I'm going to holster it so it's safe. So the evidence actually showed that our client was exonerated from that allegation. And yet, when we met with the prosecutors, they believe they're victims. And our state, that case was in Florida. Most states, like Florida, have a Victims' Bill of Rights nowadays, where victims have a lot of say in a prosecution of a case and an investigation of a case. And there's very often a benefit of the doubt given to the victims. And that's what was going on in this case, which made it really hard for us to push back and fight it. The prosecutors believe they're victims. They wanted them to have their day in court. And although we tried to present information to them to get them to drop the charges, they wouldn't do it. In fact, we asked the first prosecutor, who then added the second prosecutor, to bring the elected DA onto the case. And we met, the three of us.
We met with the elected DA.
Yeah, and if you remember, he said something very funny. A lot of times these are political positions. They're lawyers, but in this case, not an attorney who had practiced really in the courtroom, but more of a political attorney and very, very good at running the DA's office. But after we were talking, he's like, what's the guy and Mark, what's the big deal here? It's just a misdemeanor. He didn't even
He didn't know
realize
it was a felony.
Right. He didn't even realize this was a felony. So
Yeah.
we appreciate that he gave us the meeting, but it didn't accomplish anything. And then it brings up the next issue of how clients can be put in very difficult positions where even though they're innocent, they didn't do anything wrong, they wind up getting arrested and thrown in jail. Now they're faced with, hey, I know I didn't do anything wrong and the evidence supports it, but do I go to trial? The prosecutor won't drop this case. Am I going to go to trial and roll the dice and risk possibly getting convicted? You never know what a jury could do. And then the judge could throw me in jail, sentence me
Right.
to.
There are a lot of variables, and that's the problem. And we as attorneys, we may feel confident in our defense, but we can't guarantee the client that they'll be acquitted. I mean, there are cases, obviously, where you've got a real shot, and there are cases where it's pretty clear that it's a fool's errand to try the case. Those are the cases I call weekend at Bernie's, because you're walking the corpse around the room, but at the end of the day, it's dead. So in this case, we felt confident that we could go to trial, but we also presented to the client the reality that there's no way to guarantee an acquittal, and he would face the sentencing in front of a judge, and we'd know no guarantee of what the judge would do. And, recognizing a lot of times when they have weaker cases, prosecutions, especially in state court where plea bargaining is almost a unanimous daily experience, in every case, they made a plea offer that ultimately we couldn't refuse. We had to work it down and work it down and work on them and threaten to go to trial. But they made a plea offer that the client looked at and made a cost benefit analysis. A lot of times we have clients who decide they don't want to run the risk, even though we feel that it could go to trial and we could be successful. And in this case, he was faced the opportunity to avoid a criminal conviction and avoid going to jail. And he decided not to pass that up.
Yeah, those are tough calls for a client to make a lot of times. For us, we always get to go home and sleep in our own bed no matter what the outcome is. The client has to really seriously consider the risk. Is it worth the risk? Especially when we were able to negotiate a deal that resulted in no conviction, no jail, and just a short probation. But it is a really serious decision that clients, and only the client can make that decision. And we always are prepared for trial. You and I have been in hundreds of trials. I always liken it to when clients ask me about going to trial. For me, it's like an NFL player playing in the Super Bowl. I love, love, love going to trial. It's the best. It's what we do this job for. But at the end of the day, our client makes that decision whether to go to trial or not. And you and I were teed up, ready to go on this one. We felt we had a really, really strong case. And it wasn't really until the last second, but that he said, "Okay, I can't risk it." And again, we're dealing with a 75-year-old gentleman who's never been in trouble before, and he was scared to death.
Well, we achieved the result of him walking free. He
Yeah,
was free to go from that courtroom.
that's right.
So, I mean, in that regard, it made a lot of sense. But you know, what's interesting is these clients are faced with choices that are very difficult choices. And at the end of the day, as much as we advise them, they're the ones that got to live with the choice. And we recognize that. But the other part of the process that really needs to be understood is, you know, handling criminal cases, handling any kind of legal case, any kind of litigation, just like anything else in life, you get your best result when you have advantages, when you can leverage the matter. And in what we find often is prosecutors have a tendency to always be bargaining from a position of strength. And that's what they're used to. They're not really comfortable or used to bargaining from a position of weakness. And one of the advantages in Florida is you can take depositions, you have much more open discovery about the case, and you can easily try to expose the weaknesses in their case before the trial. And when they see the weaknesses in their case, that's when you start effective plea bargaining. And that's what we did in this particular case. We were able to expose the weaknesses in their case. And as a result, we were given an offer that the client couldn't refuse.
No, you're right. The outcome was the right outcome. At the same time, we get very passionate about our cases. We get to know our clients well, and we all cases kind of remain with us. Hey, we're doing this podcast because we remember all these cases, hundreds and hundreds of cases over the last, 50, 60, 70 years combined between us. But some of them kind of stay with us more than others, and this one is one of those that stays with me more than others because he really is a gentleman that I believe to this day. I mean, all these years later, I believe as strong today as I did when we handled it 10 years ago, that he never should have been prosecuted.
Right. But once that happened, there was not much we could do about it, Guy,
I
right?
know, of
I mean,
course,
prosecutors have a tendency not to want to dismiss their cases,
that's true. Yeah, yeah,
and they
it's
always
true.
want something out of it.
Right.
Um, and
Yeah.
we find this for again and again and again and again. So the idea of you're free to go sometimes means the case isn't dismissed, but the client walks out of the courtroom
Right.
free.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned the consequences there, like being arrested and so forth. And yeah, he's walking out free. But one of the other consequences for him, and this happens with a lot of defendants, is when you get arrested and it's in the news and people see it, they judge you. They immediately form opinions, even though our Constitution says you're innocent until proven guilty. This gentleman who I mentioned at the beginning, he was very affluent. He had connections with a lot of people. And once this happened, they didn't bother learning what the facts were or seeing that the evidence didn't support the government's case at all. They deserted him. They abandoned him. I remember he had, some really strong relationships politically and in law enforcement, and they all ignored or really ignored or turned on him. They weren't there for him when he needed them. That's when you find out who your true friends are in life, is when you're accused of something. And sometimes people are guilty of what they're accused of, and their true friends, will typically be there for them and understand that they made a mistake and support them through their difficult times and not abandon them. But this gentleman lost a lot of his friends. Another total consequence that people may not even think of, and it's not a significant consequence, is when you get arrested, there are certain conditions placed on you. This may sound silly to our listeners, but it was actually significant to the client. He was released from jail with conditions after his arrest. And one of those conditions was he wasn't allowed to possess any weapons. Well, in his home, which was a magnificent, huge estate on the water in South Florida, he had a wall. I called it the Game of Thrones wall. It was the most beautiful wall.
Right.
It was probably worth $500,000, if not more, of these beautiful Game of Thrones type swords and weapons. And the government made him, or the judge, when he released him from jail, said he couldn't possess any weapons. So he told me about this wall before I had seen the house. And Mark, you hadn't seen it at that point yet either. And we said we have to surrender all these weapons. And they were really permanently, attached to this wall.
And we
And
were wondering why he had to surrender. What was he going to go to a joust?
right,
What was he
exactly.
going to go to one of those medieval times,
Right. By the way, these
dinner theaters and
some of these weapons,
joust?
some of these things weighed like 80 pounds. He couldn't even pick them up. The
Right,
guy was so frail and small.
right.
So now he has to take this whole entire wall apart, which looked horrible while his case was pending for a couple of years. But the government then stores them, right? And they don't maintain them properly for him. So when he got them back 2 years later, they were basically worthless. They were rusted out. They were
Yeah,
damaged.
yeah.
Yeah. So there are a lot of consequences: reputation, loss of friendships, the
Yeah,
expenses.
there's another consequence that people, unfortunately, my clients in the white collar area don't realize is going to happen, and that is that banks
Yeah,
drop you.
that's right.
You're talking about being presumed guilty instead of being presumed innocent. When you are even sued by the SEC or you're arrested for some kind of financial crime, inevitably one day you get that notice. It doesn't happen 100% of the time, but I have found it's happened maybe 90% of my clients. You get that notice from the bank that they're closing your account,
And they
and
don't
they're
give you much
closing.
time either, right?
No, and
Yeah,
and 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 by the way, under law and under your customer agreement, which you never read because it's 70 pages long, they have the
small
right to
print.
do that.
Yeah.
And then you try to go to banks and you go to another major bank because they're all connected with information systems, can't open an account either. I've had clients trying to find banks they can put their money in. And then later on, when they're acquitted or the civil case is resolved in their favor, what happens then? Does the bank say, "Oh, well, we want you back"? No.
No.
So there are a lot of consequences. So the concept of being presumed innocent is a great concept that protects us in the court. But in real life, as you said, your friends, business associates, I mean, business deals fall apart for that very reason. There is a presumption of guilt.
And it's in the
And that's
media
just the
too.
way,
The
oh,
media,
absolutely
right?
in the
You'll see the
media.
arrest all over the media, but when your client gets exonerated or walks with no
Mm.
conviction, they don't do a follow-up article on that.
Yeah,
It's
and we'll talk at another time about handling high profile cases, which we both have, and dealing with the media, which is very, very tricky. If you think you can control the media, good luck.
right. Good
It just
luck.
doesn't happen.
You're Free to Go is sponsored by Lang Realty, South Florida's premier residential real estate broker. Whether you're buying, selling, or renting a home or condo, Lang's experienced realtors are standing by ready to help you. Contact one of Lang's top realtors today at 561 703 2427.
But
Well,
talking about getting out of a case, even though you don't go to trial and you're not acquitted in trial. I have a story that I was telling our listeners in the last episode that I would tell them about a madam.
that's right.
And
Yep.
this is the madam who actually was a madam to Tiger Woods. provided him with a number of women, and as it turns out, reputed to be the madam to Prince Andrew. And it's a very interesting story because this particular woman, a very bright young woman, beautiful woman, decided to go into business running an escort service. And what she did, recognizing what would be appealing to her clients, who were all going to have to be very, very wealthy people, given the prices she was charging, she had her clientele either choose from porn stars who were signed up with her or playmates, women who were working for Playboy. A lot of these women were actually living in the Playboy mansion, which, by the way, I was told paid them virtually nothing.
Right.
So when they had the opportunity to leave and go away for a weekend and earn 15,000 or $20,000 instead of the pittance they were getting paid by Hugh Hefner, they would make up some story that their mother was sick in Omaha or whatever, and they would leave and they would go to Turkey or wherever they would go to.
And you know, Mark,
Um,
as you know, a few years after that you represented her, she had another issue that she called, and I spoke to her about, and I found her to be extremely intelligent, and have a great business mind. And I'm just, as you share with our listeners this case, how did you feel about that? Did you see her as a very sharp
oh,
businesswoman?
absolutely. And she set up this escort business without any representation to anybody that there would be sex involved. Obviously, from the standpoint of the men who were booking these girls, these women, obviously was an expectation, but there was no express understanding that there would be sex involved. But the government saw it differently. I don't remember how the case started. It may have been a rival jealous service because she was doing fantastic business
Yes.
that reported it. And ultimately she was arrested and she was charged with very interesting charge under the Mann Act, which is basically transporting women across state lines for the purpose of having sex. And uh, the case got started. She was charged in federal court in California. And immediately I began to look into it. And one of the things that I noticed about it that was crazy was these were men who were very, very wealthy, who were paying for escorts, who were making a ton of money. I mean, these were women who were making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. So my first thought is, who's really the victim here?
Right.
We're not dealing with transporting women from, El Salvador or wherever, human trafficking. I mean, everything was totally consensual. Nobody was being hurt. There were no victims. You could look at it from the standpoint of a morality point of view, but that wasn't the basis of the prosecution.
And I think we hear
So,
about those arguments in all these types of, the massage parlor cases, or even the street, hooker case where they say, well, really, where's the victim? But you're right, it's a morality issue. It's also a religious issue that a lot of religious groups are opposed and offended by it. And it's those are laws on the books that prohibit it. But there are, it's definitely arguable that there really is no victim here. The female in this case is making a living. The male, is having a relationship, and they're comfortable consensually paying for the relationship. So that's always an interesting discussion that we have as defense attorneys with the prosecutor. But
right. And what
unfortunately,
was very
yeah,
interesting about this case, Guy, if you remember me telling you, was actually out of the hookups between some of these men and women, I think there were two marriages.
right,
I
yeah,
think it became permanent
right.
relationships. I don't
Which
know if those marriages are
it's
still in
right.
existence years later, but in any event,
It's a dating service.
it was a dating service.
Yes.
So, what happened initially when I got involved in the case, and this is kind of a funny story. My law firm that I was working for at the time, this before you and I met, had a policy like most businesses, I would imagine all businesses and law firms have, which you're not supposed to watch porn on your computer.
Right. Yep.
Well, the problem in this case was a lot of these women were porn stars. And the government's theory was because these women advertised on their own individual sites the type of sex that they were, let's say, adept at, best suited for,
Right. Experienced.
that the government was arguing that was clear to everybody that this was a sexual favor for money deal, i.e., prostitution. So I had to go on these sites. So I had to go to the head of my law firm and I had to say, look, I know we have a policy, but I've got to be able to look at porn.
Right. Did they give you permission?
They gave me
Yeah.
permission, and my office became the most popular
Yeah.
office in the entire firm. It was standing room only.
I
I could
love
throw
it.
people out.
Uh-huh.
But what became even more difficult is I had a secretary who I knew was very religious, and I wanted to be very respectful. And I said to her, look, if you don't want to be involved in helping me with this, by all means. And she declined out. We brought in somebody else who had somebody who felt more comfortable with the process. The other interesting part of this case was I started getting calls from lawyers for a lot of the men who were involved in booking these escorts.
Right. Because at this point,
And
Mark, only one person was arrested, your client, correct?
my client was the only
Only one,
person
right.
arrested.
But I think a lot of
And
men that they call in
we're
the industry
concerned,
Johns, they call them
but
Johns, were
right,
concerned.
right.
Yeah.
But the federal government doesn't arrest those people.
No.
Those are usually, when you do have John's arrests, those are arrests by local authorities.
Right. Like
And since this was a federal case, they weren't going after the men, but we were concerned that the men may be called in by the government to be witnesses in the grand jury to help them make the
right,
case.
so they all lawyered
Um,
up.
right.
Right.
So they all lawyered up, obviously. The minute this thing broke and it was a big story, I imagine all these men. And the interesting thing about it is when I said they were very wealthy, they weren't just wealthy. They were people, very prominent people. We had NFL superstars. We had NBA superstars. We had Super Bowl quarterbacks. We had famous celebrities. We had heads of studios. In fact, in one case, I had a lawyer call me anticipating that his client was going to be brought into this, concerned that I would call out and reach out to his client. To his client, who was head of one of the major studios, he said to me, look, if my client gets exposed, I just want to let you know he's going to jump from the tallest building in LA, and you're going to have that on your conscience. I said, I'm not going anywhere near him.
Right.
Talk to the U.S. attorney.
So is that really
But
why these lawyers are calling you, Mark, is to make sure you don't call their client as a witness? Or are they
oh,
calling you?
absolutely,
Yeah, I find
absolutely.
sometimes they're also calling just to see if I can give them any insight to the investigation, to see if
They
they're,
want to know
yeah,
what's going on. They
yeah,
hire these lawyers, and I've been hired in other situations like this where you just want to keep your client out of it.
correct. Yeah.
Bad publicity is not good for their client, not good for the
Mhm.
business of their client.
Yeah.
Not obviously, if their client's married and has a family, it's extremely embarrassing and could have grave
Yeah.
consequences for the marriage. So, at a minimum, these lawyers were calling, trying to find out whether I was going to call their client as a witness to help my client or whether I heard anything about their client's name
Yeah,
being mentioned by the government.
which is a ethical issue or challenge for us if we're defending someone and someone else who's peripherally related there has a lawyer who calls and says, hey guy, I know you're defending so and so, I represent Bill Jones, has his name come up at all in this investigation? And sometimes maybe it did, and us disclosing yes or no may not be in our client's best interest. So it can be an ethical dilemma or predicament for us when we get those calls from lawyers.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
Guy, you're right. And what we tend to do, and I think I speak for most lawyers, when we're in that kind of situation, even when the lawyer who calls us is a friend or
that's right.
somebody we've previously worked with, we have to say, look, I really can't talk to you about it.
Right.
That's the most. I won't lie to them. I won't say no, but I'm not going to say yes.
Yeah,
I'm just going to say I can't talk to you about it.
right. And
And I
typically,
had that happen in
yeah,
this case,
yeah.
as in other cases.
And lawyers with experience like us, well, we can read between the lines. We can read the
Yeah,
tea
sure. When
leaves.
I tell them that, they know
Right.
the answer is yes.
Exactly. Yep. Okay. That's all I needed. Thank you. Bye bye. Yeah.
Right,
Uh,
exactly. But, you know, so what happened in this case is I went to the prosecutor, and he was a very good assistant U.S. attorney, very smart. I managed to find within somewhere, I don't remember where it was in the Justice Department or in the congressional record, somewhere I found this whole body of information about testimony from the Justice Department officials about the need to go after human trafficking, about how it is a priority with the Justice Department to protect women from being victims in human trafficking cases.
Wh-
And that was a top priority for the Justice
Which we
Department.
all agree with, of course. Yeah,
Absolutely.
right. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so I went to the assistant U.S. attorney armed with all of this information. And I said, clearly, this is not that type of case. We have women who are making 3 times what you're making.
Yeah.
We have men who are enjoying themselves. We have marriages out of this. Find me a victim. Why are we wasting prosecutorial resources on a case like this? And ultimately, like I said, with a bit of leverage, we got them to offer a situation where my client wound up getting probation.
Right.
Now, she had house arrest for a short period of time. Because in federal court, they don't easily give out probation.
Correct.
Usually that's reserved for people who cooperate. So the case ended with her not going to jail. She was free to go.
Right.
And she made that choice not to go to trial, even though it would have been an amazing trial.
Mhm.
It probably would have been an incredibly embarrassing trial. We may have had to call people like Tiger Woods. I don't know who we would have called as witnesses, but we never got to that point. But here's the interesting PS on that case. A couple of years later, if you remember, when it became known that Prince Andrew had been cavorting with, let's say, women of the night, with escorts and prostitutes, I got a call from the chief editor of News of the World, which was Rupert Murdoch's corporation in London. And they wanted to buy from my client her story about the business she did with Prince Andrew. We had a meeting. It's set up in New York in a very nice hotel. I booked a suite. I had my client there, and we met with the chief editor as well as a lawyer from London who represented News of the World. And the whole purpose was to try to make a deal to sell her story. And as it turns out, because British libel laws are very strict, it's not like in the US. In the US, when you're suing for libel, the burden on proof is on the defendant to show that it's false, what you said. The exception, obviously, is when you have a public figure. Then you have to, it deals with issues of malice. But that wasn't the case here with most of the people in US that are being sued for libel. In this situation, though, with Great Britain, where they would publish the story, the burden of proof is on the person who publishes the story, the person who makes the claim, to prove that it is truthful. So the burden would be on my client.
Right.
And obviously, the burden would be on whichever outlet published it, in this case, News of the World. So what they needed was absolute proof. Well, it turns out that the proof, according to my client, was in her computer. And where was her computer?
Yeah.
It
And the
was with the government,
government.
because when they arrested her, they
Yep.
seized it.
And they never
And here's
returned it.
they never
Of
returned
course
it.
not.
When I tell you why, Guy, it's still to this day, I don't understand.
Yeah.
They demanded her password in order to return it because they wanted to copy the information
Of
in it.
course.
And for obvious reasons, she didn't want to give them the password. So I'm saying to myself, okay, this is the US government. Why do they need the password?
Right.
Now, she had it heavily encrypted. but
Yeah.
she's not some secret agent.
Right.
This isn't the
Yeah.
KGB. This isn't the Mossad. I mean, how it is that the government
Okay.
could not, the Justice Department could not bypass the password or somehow get into her computers to this day
Well,
is something I find hard to believe.
well, that's the answer to the question I asked about 15 minutes ago. Was your client smart? Because when I spoke to her, she seemed very bright. I guess the answer is yes, smart enough to encrypt her computer so that even the U.S.
Uh,
government couldn't hack it.
right. It was
Right?
crazy. So we couldn't
Yeah.
get the computer. We couldn't get them proof. We couldn't make a deal.
Yeah.
They were very wise. They obviously didn't want to publish it. Um, but then at the end, um, even though we weren't able to make a deal, they invited us out to a very, very fancy dinner at one of the top restaurants in New York. I think it was John George.
Right.
I don't even remember.
Nice
One of
five
the
hour,
ultimate
nice
restaurants.
5 hour meal.
Well, right. But I declined. Why? I wanted to go down the street to the Carnegie Deli and get a pastrami sandwich. So I made up some story that I had to meet another client.
I love that. You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that you were talking with them about some type of media deal because you did earlier say, you know, you referenced cooperation and how, you know, a deal can work, but she didn't cooperate. She didn't, you know, flip on anybody. And as we've said in our disclaimer on this video, and on our podcast, we've said it other times, we are not revealing any attorney-client privilege information. We're even changing some facts and circumstances throughout our the stories that we're sharing from these cases. But that is something that we deal with our clients in an attorney-client privilege conversation about. We have an ethical obligation to share with them that if you cooperate, the government will give you a better deal. You know, 9 out of 10 times the government wants you to cooperate, and they'll give you a better deal. So, you know, some clients say absolutely not. I will never, ever, ever cooperate. Maybe later down, as the case is getting more serious, they change their mind. Some clients want to cooperate immediately. But there's no right or wrong here. It's a personal decision. But it takes a lot of strength for a client like yours to say, you know, I'm not going to cooperate. You know, I'm going to stand firm. I'm not going to throw anyone under the bus. And I'll, you know, accept the consequences. And they hire a great lawyer like you to get them the best possible outcome. And it's very respectable, in my opinion. The other thing I think about your case is the celebrity, you know, aspect of it. The fact Tiger Woods, for example, you know, everything with names like that gets a lot of attention. So when you say even to this day you're not quite sure what got that investigation going, it could be, you know, related to any one of these high profile customers of your clients that somehow was under investigation, or someone wanted to, you know, get them in trouble, or, you know, seek revenge against somebody, a disgruntled ex-girlfriend. We just never know. But for a while there, and I'm a huge Tiger Woods fan because I'm an avid golfer. I know you're a golfer as well. You know, for a while there, anything Tiger touched, unfortunately, was put under a microscope, and if there was anything inappropriate, it hit major news. So maybe.
Right. But the interesting thing about this case, Guy, was that his name was not mentioned initially, and the claim that she was providing him women was made later on after her case had already resolved.
Oh,
But his name did not initially come up in the case. And in fact, when they did the Vanity Fair magazine expose, um, my client was mentioned in it and mentioned as providing him with a number of women.
oh,
And that was later. So
that's
his involvement or claimed
oh,
involvement um, was not
yeah.
part of what got this started. You
That
know,
is,
it's
yeah,
interesting what get cases started. A lot of times it's disgruntled spouses, certainly in IRS cases, which I've never understood because it usually winds
it's
up in them having less.
right, much less.
Um,
And then,
Although there is a bounty program or a whistleblower program that the IRS has. Then there are, you know, business uh, partners, disgruntled business partners or employees. Usually, if you get involved, the rule of thumb is if you get involved in criminal activity with other people, you better treat them well
right, you better take
because
good
what
care of them.
happens is and
Yeah,
obviously we're not encouraging people to get involved in criminal activity. But I mean, the point is, it's invariable that we have clients who wind up oh, being exposed, their crimes being exposed because either a family member, a friend, or business associate, somebody working in their business organization is mistreated or feels mistreated and winds up pointing the finger at them. And I even had a case where it was a father-son. I was
Oh,
representing the father, and it was the son who wound up turning on the father and going to the feds and exposing the scheme that he was involved in.
right.
And a lot
Yeah.
of times people do that because by going first, they may be able to insulate themselves. And if they didn't receive a lot of money from it, or they weren't actively involved in it, or minimally involved in it, there's a chance that the government or the state might turn around and rather give them immunity or use them as a witness, not prosecute them, or
Well,
treat them very leniently.
yeah,
And that's how they protect themselves.
we could do a whole episode, and maybe we will, on just how cases originate, the genesis of cases, the complainant who goes to the police and gets to the courthouse steps first. I think the two cases we talked about today both resolved in very, very favorable outcomes that we negotiated and litigated to get the great result for our clients. But a lot of our cases go to trial and we go before a jury. And you and I talked earlier, for our next episode, we should talk about our crazy ass jury selection stories.
Oh my God, I've got stories that to this day I still can't believe
I
what
can't,
happens in jury selection.
yeah, I can't wait to share them with our listeners. Some really great stuff.
Yeah.
So, but until then, Mark,
Until
it's been a
then,
great episode. And until then, you're free to
you're free to
go.
go.
Down Low Investigations is a sponsor of You're Free to Go. Behind every great criminal defense attorney is a great private investigator. That's why Mark and I use Down Low to investigate cases all over the country. Down Low can help you too, whether you're running a background check on an employee or running a background check on a blind date, or let's say you need someone followed or some other type of investigative work conducted. Down Low is the way to go. Call Download Investigations at 561 843 1806. Everything expressed and discussed in this episode are the opinions and experiences of attorneys Guy Fromston and Mark Nurek and their guests. All ethical rules are complied with. Attorney-client privilege and confidential information is not shared or released during these episodes, and names, dates, locations, and other identifying information may be changed to protect confidentiality. Topics are embellished, and none of the statements made constitute legal advice and should not be considered or relied on as such.